another edition of Coach's Corner, where I take a few minutes each and every week and we talk to college coaches, all levels, all divisions, and we try to get as much information to parents and student athletes to help educate them in a different era of college athletics. But college baseball is kind of going back to the way it was. We're going to be talking today, Big South Conference, Winthrop University, and we're going to be talking to their hitting coach, assistant coach, Mike Napolitano. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Well, Mike, I know you were up in my neck of the woods for a few years with Matty Noon at Babson, and what led you to Winthrop? What made Winthrop an appealing opportunity for you as a coach?
Yeah, Winthrop became a really appealing opportunity when Coach Mike McGuire got the head job here. He was over at South Carolina Upstate, which is actually in the Big Sense. But what made the job most appealing to me was the location, the commitment to baseball here. Ultimately the facilities. We have some of the best facilities out there, especially in our league. You got a 2,000 seat stadium with a beautiful indoor hitting facility, brand new weight room, locker room, player lounge, training room, coaches' offices, right at the field. And Winthrop has a strong winning tradition, which ultimately led me here. And Coach McGuire is a great guy to work for, and I think our players really enjoy playing for him, and we're fortunate to have a great setup here.
One of the reasons why I wanted to speak with you is because knowing the coaches, we have mutual acquaintances within the industry, and they all talk glowingly about your capability with regard to hitting instruction, being a bench coach, being very observant with regard to pitchers that your hitters have to face. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like when you're out recruiting hitters? What are some of the key things that you're kind of looking for, maybe in a high school hitter, a JUCO hitter, anything that would be appealing to you as the coach at Winthrop?
Yeah, I mean, for me, part of the identification process when it comes to a hitter, first and foremost is their comfortability in the box, their presence in the box. I want a guy who believes that they're better than everyone else. The second they step in the box, it's we're on. I'm winning this battle. Like, that's what I want. I want our guys to be confident in the box, and to me, that's something that I think is important when we're looking at hitters. I think there's obviously the tools aspect, right? I think power, bat to ball, things like that are extremely important. I don't want guys who swing and miss in the zone a ton. I think it's hard to train that out of guys. There's certain things with power, right? You can't teach power necessarily. But I also think that strike zone awareness is a very important thing that we look to identify, in the process, pitch recognition skills. I think those are the things for me that are most important because personally, I feel like if you have those attributes and you have the tools, you know, if there's adjustments that need to be made in a swing, we can make them, right? And I believe that player development is one of the most important things in college baseball. And, I think it kind of fluctuates depending on the level in the school, but I think something that we do here at a really high level is develop players and develop hitters, and it takes a certain guy to play for us. We want guys who want to work hard, who are really going to have a professional work ethic. And when you can get those guys in this environment that's bought into player development, you know, they're going to take massive jumps. You've seen a lot of guys in our first year take some pretty significant jumps, and it's credit to them because they put in the professional work habits to make themselves better. And, they took their individualized plans and got after it. And ultimately, having those tools, having those abilities, having that confidence level in the box is extremely important when we're identifying players because, you know, that's how we can shape it down the road.
I take a look at, and I always encourage parents when you're looking at a school like Winthrop, you look at not only the conference play, but the out of conference play. And you, as a university, typically play a very aggressive out of conference schedule. And so when you're talking with whether it's high school, incoming high school recruits, or that 18, 19, or 20-year-old, how can they best prepare to make that jump, say, from high school slash Legion travel baseball into, facing the Oklahoma States and the Michigan States and some of these big boy schools that are outside the Big South, but are equal to, if not, Big South schools are equal to, if not better in some cases, than a lot of those outside competitors that you guys play.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for incoming guys is playing collegiate summer leagues. I think there's really no better way to replicate what you're going to see from pitching at this level. And being able to see college arms on a day in and day out basis is important. And even guys when they get to campus, it's important for them to be in college summer leagues. You look at our hitters, and we got guys all over the place. We've got 3 hitters up in the NECBL right now. And that's because the value of facing those arms is really high, and it's going to allow guys to get better every single day throughout the spring and throughout the summer to get to that point. And then, it's always challenging your first time out of the gate for a freshman when you're facing South Carolina on a Tuesday, and first time you've seen that sort of stuff or velocity. But you come into it a little bit, and I think that's part of how we schedule too. By the time we went to Oklahoma State, I think that was our third Power Four game in 3 weeks. And by that point, the guys weren't really phased. They've played South Carolina, they've played Clemson, and now you're going to play Oklahoma State. And then by the time we played Michigan State, we had just come off Oklahoma State. So it's you get phased into it pretty quickly. But the best way to prepare for it is certainly, summer playing collegiate summer ball. I think that's a very valuable asset.
How are you becoming aware of players? I think parents and families are kind of finding it difficult to get on college radars. The misconception is that the high school player is no longer part of the college baseball recruiting process, and that couldn't be anything further from the truth. How do you generally find out? Are you finding out from high school coaches, people in the industry? How do you typically get alerted to a quality athlete that you should be recruiting?
Yeah, it's a lot of high school coaches and travel coaches. There's certain advisors who I know they'll reach out. Really, it's just a lot of different people who are in these kids' corners reaching out. And I talk to high school coaches every day. I talk to travel coaches every day. I talk to advisors every day. I sometimes you get a recommendation by the dad in the stands. Like
Right.
like there's really no set way anymore of how this works. I scroll Twitter half my day because it's who's going into the transfer portal, what JUCO kids available, what high school arm just pitched at the Boston Classic and was 88, 92, right? Like I think there's so many different avenues now, but having the right people in your corner is important. Like there's always a handful of high school coaches and travel coaches I'll always go to because, you know, what they recommend is right on brand for what we're looking for. So, it's really a combination of just about everything at this point, but at the end of the day, you still got to get guys in front of your eyes.
So, one of the things that I really would love for young hitters and parents to understand is the ability to be mentally tough as a hitter, understanding the word resiliency and what it takes to, sure, I just had a tough Tuesday against, South Carolina, but I got to get ready, and I'm going to be playing whether it's a Radford or a Davidson or a Charleston or anybody else, High Point. How do you teach young hitters that mental toughness, that mental discipline that they have to be able to flush yesterday and be present today?
I actually took this one from Matt Noon, but we talk a lot about turning the page. Being able to turn the page from at bat to at bat, from day to day, and just recognize like it's a 56 game regular season.
Right.
It's never stopping. You look up
Right.
and all right, you're panicking after game 4. Well, buddy, we got 52 more games. It like and it's just understanding the course. But I think for our guys, it also falls back to they understand that their work habits are always going to keep them in a good place. And they can fall back to getting in the cage and working hard. And they also know that the support they need is here from a coaching standpoint, whether it's myself or Coach McGuire. We're both on the hitting side, and they have great relationships with us. I believe that there's a high level of trust there, and just knowing that they can fail and it's also not going to write them off for the year, and it's just understanding that when you can fall back to your work habits, when you can trust the people you're around, it's a lot easier to turn the page. If you don't work as hard or you don't trust the people you're around, it's a little bit harder to turn the page because you're scared to turn that page. And
Right. Exactly.
downward spiral happens. And I just think for us, it's living within the moment and being able to turn the page is huge. And there's some days that we're having conversations, turn the page after an at bat in the dugout. There's days right after the game we're talking about turning the page. Our guys aren't perfect by any means where they don't get beaten up a little bit mentally, but they know how to overcome that, which I think is a learned tool because it takes some maturity, it takes some failure, and especially for some high school kids, right? There are some kids who go and hit 400, 500 in high school baseball, and you get to this level and it's not as easy, right? And it's learning how to fail. Like it's a learned skill too, which I think is
Well, I think that's one of the best pieces of advice is learning how to fail, fall, get back up, dust yourself off, compete. I want to encourage parents. Winthrop University is a prestigious, both academic and athletic university. I know my son Tyler, when he was at Vanderbilt, they used to play Winthrop, probably that first or second series every year. Encourage you to go into the Blue Book, A, create your profile, but B, take a look around, take a look at Winthrop, take a look at the coaches. Coach McGuire is an elite college coach. He has been an elite college coach for many, many years. Mike Napolitano, as I just mentioned it previously, was at Babson. So always understand baseball is a constantly evolving, changing sport, but you can find and have access to not only coaches, but camp information, everything and anything about Winthrop baseball can be found on the Baseball Blue Book. And on that note, when you're conducting a camp at Winthrop and players are coming in, how should they best prepare for a camp now? And I always try to encourage parents, take a walk around the campus, take a look around the facilities and the amenities. What do you encourage parents when they're coming in with their student athlete as far as a college visit on top of a college camp? Do you discuss that with parents while they attend and watch their athletes at your camps?
Yeah, I think for us it's important to check out Rock Hill. I think Rock Hill
Right.
is a really cool place. We're 30 minutes outside of Charlotte, and I think it's a city that's really blown up over the past few years just with how big Charlotte has gotten. And I think it's pretty important to check out Rock Hill. I mean, we've got a lot of cool places around here to check out in our downtown area and right on Cherry Road, which is what we're off of. And, seeing the campus and checking it out and being able to walk around and get a feel for, what it looks like. And unfortunately, during the summer, you don't have a lot of students here,
Right.
not getting a real feel for it. But I think being able to see, they got a beautiful campus here. It's your true southern looking campus, and I think that's where parents do your homework, look into it, understand, what's in the area. You know, some people care more about where they're going to stay when they come visit their kid, right?
Right.
Hotels are. I think just understanding, the area you're around and what you're getting into because it gives you a good idea of okay, I don't want to be here or I do really want to be here. Check out Charlotte, understand what's around the area. I think that's an important piece because ultimately you're trying to make a decision for the next handful of years, and I think that understanding what you're surrounded by is extremely important, and how close it is to the nearest airport. We're fortunate that's 30 minutes away. And
Right.
for us, we do so much recruiting. Obviously, we do a lot of recruiting in state, and we take care of our backyard. But we also do a lot of recruiting all over the country. I just spent the past month up in the Northeast recruiting, and, we want Northeast guys. We've got some guys from Texas, we've got guys from California, Canada. So it's understand the area you're getting into because that's where you're going and that's where you want to be. And we're fortunate to have an unbelievable area to be in with Rock Hill being a great place and Charlotte being right up the road. But I think getting an understanding for that is very important.
So talk a little bit about that because you mentioned you're active on X, formerly known as Twitter. How do you want to be approached with regard to potential student athletes, whether they're portal athletes, JUCO graduates, or high school athletes? How do you prefer to be contacted? Is it video in an email? Is it a Twitter X direct message? What's the best way to reach out to Mike Napolitano?
Yeah, for me it's a combination of Twitter and email. I think for me, I probably see my DMs a lot quicker than I see my email. I think that's the best way. I'd include video. I think video is extremely important. It's got to give me a glimpse of who you are. And including, especially for transfers and junior college guys, including stats. I want
Right.
to see, all right, this kid pitched 25 innings at some junior college with 27 strikeouts and 9 walks. That really opens my eyes at that point, right? Whereas having to do the wild goose chase to then find out,
Right.
okay, we pitched 9 innings with 11 walks, 11 punch outs, 13 hits, it becomes a little bit less appealing at that point. But I think, being able to put those stats in there where I can make a quick decision. But especially for high school guys, put in your schedule, put in your coach's contact. That way, I know who to reach out to. I want to be if we're going to be at PBR next week for the national championship. I want to know where you're playing and when, because if I want to go see you, it's right here in front of my face and I can make a note of it instead of later on today when I go on the computer and start to look at the schedule, then I'm just trying to remember it off the top of my head. That's why I got my notepads and I write everything down because I'll forget. But if it's easily accessible for me, it's even better.
Well, I want to encourage parents, athletes. Winthrop University is an absolute, it's a beautiful campus. It plays in a great conference. They have a great coaching staff. I highly encourage you to do some homework. And if you feel that you're a fit, and Coach Napolitano is the type of coach that you might like to play for, you do a little homework, you look at the coaching staff, you see Coach McGuire. Encourage you to give him a follow on Twitter, on X. And then obviously, as you just alluded to, fire off a DM with some video. Make sure you get some quality video. Don't make them look through a microscope to try and see who you are. But Mike, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join me today and sharing a little bit about not only you as a coach, but Winthrop University as a potential baseball school for a student athlete.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having us and we hope to talk soon.
Oh, we definitely will. I know you're going to be you'll be a future head coach somewhere down the road. That's for sure. I know everybody speaks highly of you up here in the Northeast. But Mike, thanks again and best of luck going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate it.